So you're the one who states that America is broke and is even in a worse state than Greece and Ireland. How so? What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, we economists look at all the bills the government has to pay, and in the U.S. case, we have enormous bills that have been kept off the books that are not official debts, but they're very real. For example, paying me my social security benefits, my old age pension, that's a real obligation. It's not part of official government debt, but it's, very important because there are 78 million baby boomers who are going to get these social security payments, and in addition, medical payments from the government. If you look at all those payments, they're about $3 trillion a year. So we have these huge bills. Nobody has thought about paying for them. And Congress and the presidents over the years have just focused on official debt and basically have not told the public about these big bills.
You said the amount of the fiscal gap in the United States is, in your estimation, $222 trillion. Is this right?
$222 trillion. If you take
this is like an astonishing number, which is like 3 times the world's GDP. This is more than what the world makes.
20 times higher than the official debt in the hands of the public, which is 11 trillion. So if you add all these spending obligations into the distant future, and you compare them with all the taxes, and you include in the spending all the interest payments and principal payments on the debt, on the official debt, you have 222 trillion in present value. Now this is 12% of GDP on an ongoing basis. In other words, we need to get 12% more of GDP, either in tax increases or spending cuts, in order to have the fiscal gap be zero. We're doing far too little too late. It's like operating on a person with cancer, and you say, well, there's a big tumor here. We're just going to take a little bit out today, and we'll come back in 5 years, and we'll take out some more. But maybe in 5 years, the patient is dead because the tumor got bigger. So this is why we are in worse shape than Greece. And Greece, it's about 10% of GDP they need on an ongoing basis. We need 12%. Italy, it's about 5%. Germany, it's about 5%. So when you look at it from this perspective, it's a whole different story than when you look just at the official debt. Because these governments are making choices, word choices, about what to call official obligations and what to call unofficial.
So are they intentionally hiding the
They're
enormity
intentionally
of the
hiding
problem?
this. They've been spending, in our country, 6 decades running a massive Ponzi scheme, taking from young people, giving to old people, and then telling the young people, don't worry, you'll get yours when you're old. Promising pensions, promising healthcare benefits. And, this is happening in all countries. Even Russia has a pension system, but it doesn't seem to be in as bad a shape as ours in terms of paying for its benefits in the future.
But I mean, this number, 222 trillion, I mean, what exactly is this, where is this money going? Who is spending it? I mean, certainly not the average American. What is it, like the 1% of the super rich, the military needs? Where's it going?
Where's all the spending?
Yeah.
Well, you have, again, you've got a lot of old people now. They're getting very high benefits, about $30,000 per person. It's scheduled to go up to about $40,000 when I retire. which will be about 15 years. So you can see that we're just very generous to the old people in our country.
What do you suggest? Like cut spending, raise taxes? That would be suicidal to any American president.
Well, we have to be adults. If we're running the country, we have to act like adults because our main responsibility as adults is to make sure our kids have a good future. So we have to reduce the growth rate of the benefits to the elderly. And that requires cutting the growth, being much more careful about how much we spend on health care, because it's been, the health care benefits have been growing at twice the growth rate of per capita GDP for 40 years. These are the government health care benefits for the elderly. So it can't continue because it's going to kill the country. So we have a huge problem. It's being hidden. It's not being described.
Russian corporates are facing significant risks. Those are the words of Anton Tabak. He's a director at Rus Rating in Moscow. Now that Russia, of course, has been cut to junk by Standard & Poor's, refinancing foreign currency debt just got a lot harder for Russian companies. Just check out this chart. It shows that $42 billion of non-ruble denominated Russian corporate bonds and loans are coming due this year. It shows every month, February, March, April, May, and so on and so forth. And on the right side, it goes from no rubles to 10 billion rubles. And as you can see, February is the big month. $10 billion worth are maturing in February alone. Most companies, of course, will suffer the fate of the sovereign. They'll have their ratings downgraded, threatening to boost borrowing costs. So says this man, Anton Tabak. He says it'll be more expensive and more complicated to redeem and refinance debts. Just for the record, dollar-denominated of bonds of companies in Russia have lost 15% in the last 12 months as sanctions were imposed on A, the biggest banks, B, the biggest energy producers, following President Putin's incursion into Ukraine back in March. And that, by the way, compares with the gain of 3.2% for its developing nation peers. Individually, Russia's largest oil producer, Rosneft, has $8.3 billion due this year. That's the most among companies, which also includes Sberbank and Lukoil as well. So Rosneft is very much the company to watch. And as this man says right here, Anton Tabak from Rus Rating, Russian corporates are now facing significant risks after that S&P downgrade to junk. Definitely a chart to watch.
Property bubble, cash crunch, ghost cities, Ponzi scheme, financial crisis. These are just a few of the negative epithets used in recent months to describe the Chinese economy. Some are exaggerations, but all derive from one basic truth. China's growth relies more than ever on debt. Until 5 years ago, China was like any healthy economy, with some debt, but not too much. But it lost its debt inhibition in late 2008 when the global financial crisis erupted. With growth slowing sharply and 20 million people losing their jobs overnight, the government unleashed a giant stimulus that was powered almost entirely by bank loans. The debt genie was out of the bottle, and since then, stuffing it back in has been extremely difficult. There are signs that China's debt-fueled model of growth is now running into trouble. Exhibit A are the balance sheets of local governments. Technically, they're not allowed to borrow money, and yet they've become some of China's biggest debtors. Analysts estimate that their debt is now 20 to 40% of GDP, up from next to nothing 5 years ago. How has this happened? Through a simple swap. Local governments have taken land and given it to companies they own. These companies have then used the land as collateral to get loans from banks, eventually selling the land to property developers. It's been an easy way to obtain financing, but it means local governments have taken more and more land and fueled bigger and bigger real estate developments, even in poorer parts of the country, like here in the city of Guiyang in the southwest.
This, when complete, will be China's biggest real estate development at more than 18 million square meters. How big is that? Well, it's about 7 times the size of London's Olympic Park, 5 times the size of New York's Central Park. It aims to have 350,000 residents, or more than 1 in every 10 people living here in Guiyang. It'll have 31 bus lines, 10 shopping malls, 8 schools, 6 large parks. And it was all made possible by the land for debt financing model that has underpinned the development of China's cities.
In terms of sheer scale and ambition, the Garden City property development is amazing. The only problem is that there are several other massive residential communities all being built at the same time. There may be lots of people who want to buy homes, but there's not enough to fill up all the properties that are being built.
卖完的话，应该是70%-80%是卖完了，不过是没有人住，因为人很少嘛，没有商家敢来嘛。因为新开的楼盘它价格更低嘛，因为它是一手房，比如说就3000多就可以买1个平方了，所以很多人都去买那边，所以这边它价格就要跌嘛。你去这个周边看，很多地方都在盖楼盘。 所以现在这个房价肯定涨不了。
These troubles are beginning to expose the risks in China's chain of debt. In Guiyang, the government has relied on a city-owned investment company to transform land into debt, into financing for infrastructure development. But with the property market slowing, land sales have suffered. The city investment company has struggled to raise new debt and to pay back what it's already borrowed. In Pianpo, a village north of the city, the company started building a highway, but was unable to complete it because it ran out of funds. Because of the unfinished construction, villagers have been cut off from running water for nearly a year. Rubbish is also piling up on the streets of Tianpo. It's just one example of how debt is starting to take a toll on China. Companies from shipbuilders to solar panel makers have dug themselves deep into debt holes and are now faced with painful restructuring to survive. China's overall credit to GDP ratio shot up from 130% before the global financial crisis to nearly 200% today. That's a dangerously fast increase in debt in a very short space of time.
So long as China has grown incredibly quickly, it's been able to outrun its debt. But ever-increasing amounts of debt have fueled that growth. With the economy now slowing, it's becoming harder and harder to paper over that debt. There's plenty of tinder, lots of fuel. All that's needed now is a spark.
Amount of corporate debt out there, which, by the way, is 3 or 4 times the GDP of the United States. And that corporate debt, it takes the form of corporate bonds, and there's what are called high-yield bonds, which are often referred to as junk bonds. In other words, corporations who have a sketchy enough credit history that they have to pay higher interest rates in order to get people to loan them money. And then there's, the investment-grade bonds, the AAA bonds, and there's a lot of those out there. And those are bonds of, the traditional companies that are considered stable. And what's happening is
restart.